So right after the Meiji Restoration, the government is basically focusing on westernizing reforms, which we went over quite a few, and building this new army and navy. At first, they weren't too interested in politics. Okay, they didn't really think about it. And actually, after Emperor Meiji was restored to the throne in 1868, the government goes back to restoring and using a lot of those old bureaucratic offices from the Taiho reform of 702. Do you remember that? So a lot of the bureaucratic offices, Minister of the Right, Minister of the Left, these old titles were brought back. And that's because they had no time to come up with a new system. They were focused on westernizing, and they didn't have time to worry about political systems yet. So, according to the charter oath that Emperor Meiji wrote, all men were created equal and everybody could participate in government. So, yes, that is true on paper, but in reality, Emperor Meiji was an absolute monarch. He was the man at the top, he was a divine god, and nobody could ever say anything against him. Okay, who was he supported by? Well, he was supported by his ministers and his advisors, and it happens that all of these ministers and advisors, who you can see on the right there, were from Satsuma and Choshu. Okay, so if you wanted to be an advisor to the emperor, you wanted to have any bit of influence or power in this new government, if you were not from Satsuma or Choshu, you could kiss your chances goodbye. And that's why this was called the Meiji oligarchy. Oligarchy means it's power that is held and shared in the hands of a select group of people. That group of people was Satsuma and Choshu, former samurai who have now become westernized politicians and are advising the emperor. But during the 1870s, people begin to say, you know what, their charter oath says that we're all created equal, but that's not what's happening here. Okay, we need greater representation for all people in government. And so Itagaki Taisuke, who was actually from Tosa province, another former outside daimyo, he creates the People's Rights Movement, which you can think of as Japan's first political party. And the People's Rights Movement felt that the Meiji oligarchs, the Satsuma-Choshu ex-samurai who are running the show, because they felt that they had a right to do so, since they were the ones who toppled the Tokugawa, they argue, this People's Rights Movement argues for an elected assembly, where people vote for people to represent them, political parties, and also a greater voice for people in their government. Okay, and this clashed with the values of the Meiji oligarchs because they felt that it's still too early for the common people to have a role in the government. Okay, we're not a democracy. Let us handle it for now, and then maybe we'll give you a chance to have more of a voice later. But the people were not having it, so they fought back through the press. For the first time, we have a press in Japan. Newspapers are opened, political journals are written, and in these newspapers and the political journals, in the press, people speak out against the Meiji government. They say, you know, we need to have more rights, we need to have more representation in the government. And so this is how journalism starts in Japan, through these opposition newspapers and political journals that are speaking out against the Satsuma and Choshu oligarchs and asking for more power. So Itagaki Taisuke's People's Rights Movement evolves into the first political party, which was opened in 1875. It was called the Patriotic Party of Japan, which its first platform stood for freedom of speech, which didn't really exist. You couldn't speak out against, of course, the emperor or the Meiji oligarchs without being arrested, right? They felt that a constitution should be written, right? A real constitution. And also he fought for the representation of people in the political assembly. Okay, so that all people, no matter who you are, have someone speaking on behalf of you in the government. There is no one like that right now. The oligarchs are running the show, but Itagaki wants people to be elected to speak out for their constituents in a parliament. So he wants some kind of political assembly. Of course, the Meiji oligarchs, as you can imagine, don't like this. They don't like having people speaking out against them, so they shut up the newspapers by enacting very repressive anti-freedom of speech laws. Okay, so a secret police is developed to go against reporters who might be speaking out against the government, and also restricting political debate. So the Meiji government is also not, very democratic. They're quite authoritarian by any standards, which was common for governments in those days. But in 1881, Emperor Meiji and the Satsuma-Choshu oligarchs, they promised that by the end of the 1880s, they would have a constitution and a parliament and political assembly. These two things would be established by the end of the decade. Would they be able to keep their promise or not? We don't know. In the 1880s, so thanks to the demands of Itagaki Taisuke's People's Rights Movement, which was very, very vocal in saying we need an assembly, we need a constitution, the Meiji government starts work on planning a constitution and opening up this parliamentary system of government. So Emperor Meiji puts in Ito Hirobumi, and I mentioned his name. He was a former Choshu samurai. He's one of the Choshu oligarchs. He had also gone to the Iwakura mission 10 years before. So he was put in charge of basically writing the constitution and opening a parliamentary system of government. It's a big job, but Ito is the best one to do it since he went to Europe 10 years before. So in 1882, he goes again to Europe for the second time in 10 years, and he studies all the Western constitutions. He looks at the Constitution of Britain, France, etc. Of course, he liked the German one the most because the German constitution gives a lot of power to the monarch, to the military, and to the oligarchy, which is exactly what they want for Japan because they want the monarch, the military, and the Satsuma-Choshu oligarchs to have the most power. So he goes with modeling the Japanese constitution on the German model. Also, in 1885, the government for the first time allows political parties to form. So there were two main political parties at this time. The first one is the Progressive Party. It was more conservative and supported by the urban elite. So the rich in the cities, intellectuals, the factory owners that were popping up. So this party was basically the ruling class's conservative party. Okay? And the Liberal Party was a little more center-left. It supported the rights of farmers. For the first time in Japanese history, there is some organization that is fighting for the interests of the farming and agricultural classes. This has never happened before. The Liberal Party, which is center-left in its outlook, is supporting the rights of the poor and the farmers. So these are the two political parties that are formed in the 1880s. That same year, a cabinet system of government was created, very similar to the British model. Ito Hirobumi becomes the first prime minister of Japan. Okay, and how are prime ministers selected if there's no elected assembly, there's no elections yet? How do you become a prime minister? In the early days, right at this point, prime ministers and his cabinet were selected by the oligarchs. Not a democratic system at all. In other words, the Satsuma-Choshu oligarchs say, we want this person to be prime minister. And usually they select someone from within their little group. So Ito Hirobumi, he is the one who's most entrenched in this oligarchy because he's from Choshu. He's right there, in the political ranks. So he's selected by a council of oligarchs to be the prime minister. So at this point, it's not a very democratic system at all, but it's a good start. And finally, the piece de resistance in 1889, the Meiji Constitution is completed by Ito Hirobumi. Okay, the prime minister. And as prime minister, he presents it to the Japanese people as a gift from the emperor. Okay, so that's how propaganda works. The public has said, we're giving you this from the emperor as a gift. You have rights given to you by him. And that's why it's called the Meiji Constitution, because apparently it's Emperor Meiji's gift to the Japanese people. So under this constitution, a parliament is formed for the first time in Japanese history, which you can see in the picture below. There's Emperor Meiji standing at the podium and gifting the people with this constitution. The parliament in Japan is known as the Diet or the Diet, depending who you ask. I'm going to call it the Diet. So this parliament or diet that's created has two houses. You have the upper house of peers, which is basically something that is not, you cannot be elected to the House of Peers. You have to be selected among the political and wealthy elite and appointed by the Satsuma-Choshu oligarchs, who would often appoint themselves and their friends. So it's like the British upper house, where you don't have the House of Lords, where it's the political elite who are appointed to that position. They inherit these seats. The lower House of Representatives is the one that's elected by the people. So each prefecture, each district in each prefecture elects its own representative to go to the Diet and represent the people of that area. But both houses did not have equal power. Okay, did not have equal power. In other words, the elite peers did not have to concede to the demands of the elected officials. In other words, if the House of Representatives passes a law that states that, for example, all women should be allowed to vote, right? And the House of Peers didn't want this, they would veto it, and the House of Representatives, who are elected, are not able to fulfill their campaign promise to their constituents. So the House of Peers was there to protect the interests of the wealthy classes. The executive branch, the prime minister, was going to be selected by the oligarchs, which means that it's really a dictatorial system since the oligarchs have to pick whoever they want. Okay, and the elected representatives, they have some power, but it's just a little bone that is thrown to the common people. The real power is going to be held by the House of Lords and the prime minister. Okay, and the prime minister is very influential since he's the one picked directly by the Satsuma-Choshu oligarchs. Okay. And this constitution does declare that all people are created equal, okay? And the truth of the matter is, however, that the Meiji Constitution is a very conservative document, okay? It does grant liberties and freedoms. It says that people are equal, there's human rights, this and that. But the whole document is, quote unquote, subject to limitations, which means that yeah, there's human rights, yeah, there's freedom of speech, yeah, all people are created equal, but if the government sees fit, we can limit the rights that are bestowed in this document. So really, it's a concession to people like Itagaki Taisuke and the more liberal-minded people in the government, but it did not really do anything to make Japan a democratic nation. It was a compromise that looked really good on paper, but it really was not that good. Japan is still a very authoritarian country. What the Constitution does do is the first article, in fact, declares that the country is under the leadership of the emperor. He's the divine leader of the country. He is a god. And even though we have prime ministers and oligarchs and elected representatives and all these political parties, the head honcho is still the emperor. Everyone is below him. And so if he doesn't like something, he can do whatever he wants. Okay? He could make this all null and void. So it's very interesting that the Constitution makes it very clear from the get-go that the emperor is a god, he's the leader, and that all of this is fine, but if he doesn't like it, if he doesn't like something, he has the final say. So yes, Japan has political parties now, an elected diet, prime ministers. It all looks great. But if you really dig a little deeper, you can see that it's a very authoritarian state. The Satsuma-Choshu oligarchs have extreme power, even with all these elections that are taking place, because they're the ones who pick the prime minister. So yeah, there's elections. Even with the elections, only men have the right to vote. Women are still not given the vote at this time, which was the same in other nations as well. But I want you to realize that yes, Japan made great strides politically, because having a Western-style constitution, having a prime minister, having an elected parliament, these are big deals. But if you examine a little bit, things are not as free and democratic as you would think. Okay?